Today's story starts out quite normally, but quickly turns into a strange and terrifying situation. A man, living alone in his house, suddenly has a power outage one evening. However, what's strange is not just the power outage, but what happens afterwards. As he goes outside to check the electrical panel, certain that he will be able to fix the problem, a strange feeling suddenly comes over him. The house suddenly becomes indescribably quiet, although he still feels that something is wrong. He returns to the living room, trying to find the reason for this abnormality, and then suddenly he realizes something that makes his heart go cold. He is no longer alone. Starting with strange noises coming from the corners of the house, a vague figure passing by the window, until the feeling that someone is watching him. The strange events seemed to become clearer with each passing minute, and this made him feel more and more confused. He didn't know if he was falling into a nightmare or not. This was just the beginning of a long and creepy story that he could never have imagined. When the lights suddenly came back on, everything was back to normal. Or maybe not. It felt like it couldn't be a coincidence, and the man couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. And the strangest thing was, he could still feel the presence of something in the house, even when nothing else was happening. This story continues in a mysterious direction and makes anyone who hears about it shudder. And we all have one question: is there really something unusual in this house? Or is it simply the imagination of a man in a state of stress? On February 27, 2025, Emily, John's wife, was driving home with her daughter after visiting her family. The storm outside made everything gloomy and quiet. Although she was very nervous about driving in bad weather, Emily tried to stay calm. She knew that the road home was not too far, but the heavy rain and strong wind limited visibility. Every time the car passed through deserted roads, she felt a little anxious in her heart, worried about the safety of her family. Their daughter, Lily, sat in the back and yawned, not paying much attention to the storm outside. Emily smiled as she looked through the rearview mirror, but then she immediately felt a strange uneasiness in her heart. Suddenly, she began to think of John, the husband she loved. She knew that he was home alone, enjoying the quiet evening, but she couldn't help but worry about him. Was he lonely? Was he worried about the storm? Was something wrong at home? She quickly pushed these thoughts aside and focused on driving. She knew she needed to do her best to get her daughter home safely. But as she drove through a deserted area, her phone suddenly vibrated. She glanced down at the screen and saw a text notification from John. "Are you home yet? I'm worried about you and Lily. The storm is really bad out here." She quickly texted back, "We're on our way. Don't worry. You three will be fine." However, a strange feeling came over her. Maybe it was just the fatigue of the trip, but Emily felt like there was something waiting for her when she got home. As she drove closer to her home, the storm began to get more intense. She noticed that the lights on the empty streets were dimming, and there seemed to be an eerie silence in the air. The strong winds blew, making her feel her tension rising. She turned on the radio in the car to listen to the news, hoping to get more information about the weather and storm conditions. Just then, the voice of the radio announcer came on, reporting that a riot was taking place at a nearby state prison. The tension in her heart increased when she heard that a dangerous criminal had escaped. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. The monster of Cell Block C. The name the announcer mentioned made her unable to help but think of the horror stories she had heard about that criminal. He had attacked many guards in the past, and his appearance was also very strange, causing anyone who heard his name to shiver. She drove faster, worried, but for just a moment, she felt a strange unease. Does John know about this? Does he feel safe? The questions kept popping up in her mind. She didn't want to think about the bad things, but she couldn't help but worry about the situation. As she drove closer to home, it was dark. The rain was still falling, and the wind was still howling. Emily looked out the car window and saw their house in the darkness. She breathed a sigh of relief at the thought of her family being together in a cozy home. But as soon as the car stopped in front of the door, she felt something was wrong. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. She got out of the car, pulled her daughter out, and walked into the house. The front door opened, but there was no sound from inside. Emily felt a strange feeling spread through her, as if something was waiting for her. She called John's name softly, but there was no answer. She walked into the living room, and as she looked around, she noticed that the lights were off. Anxiety began to rise in her. He certainly doesn't sleep this early, she told herself. She sensed something was wrong, and as she walked down the dark hallway, she heard a strange sound. It was the ringing of a phone. She couldn't make out what it was, because her phone was off, and John's phone had been left on charge. The ringing grew louder and louder, and Emily stopped, listening in the darkness. All she could think about was finding John and making sure everything was okay. When I think back to those dark days, there is only one feeling that comes to mind: panic. It started out as a normal night. It was raining hard, and all I wanted to do was call John to make sure he was home safe. But then the power went out, and I couldn't reach him, couldn't text, couldn't make a call. During the storm, I felt isolated, trapped in a space where I could do nothing but look out the window and hope. I certainly tried my best to reach him on the kid's iPad. I just wanted to know if he was safe. I can only imagine the look of worry on his face when he realized his phone was dead. He was probably confused and scared, but I couldn't tell him that I just wanted him home, safe. It made me feel like things were spiraling out of control. I began to notice a change. A sound began to echo from somewhere in the house. It was a chime, like the iPad texting, but not a simple chime like before. No, it was a continuous, incessant chime from upstairs, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of fear. It wasn't the normal sounds of everyday life. It was something else, something inexplicable. And then I realized it could be John. I imagined him trying to reach me. But why the sound of our child's iPad? It felt like I could hear his panic. My heart started to beat faster. I tried to stay calm, but I couldn't. Why were there these incessant chime? I knew I had to go out and find him. In that moment, I felt like all the safety in this house had suddenly disappeared. Everything around me became blurry, and I began to sense strange movements, strange sounds coming from above. I could feel his anxiety. He had started climbing the stairs, hurriedly, and I could only stand there, unable to do anything but hope he was safe. Whatever awaited him, I knew he would face his fears this night. As he climbed the stairs, the bell rang again incessantly. I could feel the tension in his footsteps, and I just hoped he wouldn't run into anything dangerous. I heard his footsteps, the sound of his flashlight shining through the dark house. This house, where we had lived for so long, was now filled with darkness and strange sounds. And then, suddenly, he turned around, confused, panicked. In the darkness, I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could feel the tension in his every move. At that moment, a new sound rang out, a loud, pounding sound, as if something very heavy was hitting the window, the wood, everything in its path. My feeling at that moment was like I was trapped in a nightmare, unable to do anything but wait. Neither John nor I knew what to do, only fear and anxiety growing with each passing moment. Finally, he ran into the bedroom, grabbing the flashlight as if it were his last lifeline. Standing in front of the door, he didn't dare open it right away. Why? Because inside this room, there was something we couldn't explain, something that had surpassed our understanding. A dim light shone from under the door, and the bell rang again. When the door opened, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. What I saw was not what I expected. A scene I couldn't imagine was waiting for us inside. And when I looked into his eyes, I knew that we had fallen into a nightmare from which there was no escape. I remember every detail of that night, and no matter how hard I try to forget it, it still haunts me to this day. John had always been a good man in my eyes. He was a wonderful father, a good husband, always taking care of his family, willing to help others, and even adopted wild animals. He was the guy you could trust, the guy who would pick up money on the street and return it to you, never passing up an opportunity to do the right thing. But then, I discovered a side of him that I never expected. Not only was John a good person, he could also be a bully. A real bully. For the past 5 years, John had been tormenting a victim in the virtual world, beating, insulting, and encouraging others to do the same. I couldn't understand why he did it, but it was part of his life, and I couldn't change it. That night, when I heard John's hurried footsteps on the stairs, I knew something was wrong. He ran into the bedroom as if he was trying to escape something. I stood outside, feeling the fear in the air. And then, from inside the bedroom, I heard horrible noises. Something fell, arguing, and a sound I couldn't identify. Something was happening that I couldn't imagine. When I opened the door to the room, I saw a sight I would never forget. The attacker was standing in the middle of the room, holding our dog in his arms, as if he were about to strangle it. I saw the panic in John's eyes, but worse, I felt the sheer terror in him. He knew that it was his victim, the one he had bullied all this time, now back for revenge. Suddenly, I heard a loud bang on the door. Maybe it was not just one attacker, but 2. I didn't know what to do. I just felt like a weakling, standing there in confusion, unable to protect anyone. John turned around. His eyes seemed to collapse. He was preparing for the worst death. The door began to open, and John closed his eyes, put his hands on his head, preparing for the punches, the attacks he thought he would receive. But then a few seconds passed, and nothing happened. An eerie silence spread in the room. John slowly opened his eyes. His eyes were blank, as if he didn't understand what was happening. I stood there, unable to breathe. It was strange. He was still alive, but at what cost? Is it possible to undo what he did to others in the past? Can I save him from his own darkness? No one has the answers, and I know we will have to face this differently, even if it means facing the devastation he has caused. Oh, I never thought that life with John could be so strange. It was hard to believe that I could love a man who was not only strong, but also had situations that were so funny that I couldn't stop laughing, but also had moments that were really dangerous and stressful. That evening, when John came home from a long day, he looked very tired, but he had a strange look on his face that I had never seen before. He didn't say anything, just silently went to the kitchen to get some water, then turned to look at me. I saw at a glance that something was wrong. And then he told me about a riot in the state prison where one of his old friends, the one we called the monster of cell block C, had escaped. But surprisingly, he had not come to endanger John, but to save him and our dog. I couldn't believe what I had just heard. The monster of cell block C? I had always thought it was just a name. John used to tease us, but now I had to face the fact that this person was actually a part of our story. John told me that after his friend saved our dog from the attacker, everything turned chaotic. John said he stood by and watched his friend defeat the attacker, but what surprised him was his own creativity in coming up with a bizarre plan. He ran into the bedroom, took an old stuffed frog, tore off the frog's head, and used super glue to stick the frog's head onto the attacker's head. The enemy didn't know what to do, just stood there with the frog's head stuck on his head, as if it was a joke, but also a relief. I have to admit, I couldn't help but laugh at the thought of that scene. But what touched me was the friendship between John and the monster of Cell Block C. Even though they had spent years in prison, John had always considered him a trustworthy friend, and that day he had done everything to protect us. After it was all over, the police came and took the attacker away, but John couldn't help but think about his friend. He knew that the monster of Cell Block C would have to go back to prison, and although he didn't want to part ways, John understood that it was necessary. So everything went back to normal, at least for us. This story was strange, but for John, this was just one of the adventures he had been through, and I, as his wife, couldn't help but feel both worried and proud. John was not only the man I loved, but also a trustworthy friend, always ready to do anything for the people he loved. But there's one more thing I want to say. A message from me to those who loved John. Don't touch my frog. It's a part of the story that we'll always remember.